Welcome to an hour of Healthmade Radio. Healthmade is a community for natural health seekers where we educate people about common health conditions and share extensive research on the most effective natural health treatments and promote legislation that protects our health freedoms. A core concept belief is in the innate intelligence and healing power of the body, and if properly supported spiritually, emotionally, and nutritionally, it can find its way back to health. Healthmade Radio will bring information from integrative health experts throughout the world. Check us out at healthmade.co. Health is what you make it. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt, and I will be your host. Today's guest is Annie Grace. At 26, Annie was the youngest vice president in a multinational company, and her drinking career began in earnest. At 35, in a global C-level marketing role, she was responsible for 28 countries and drinking almost 2 bottles of wine a night. Annie didn't want to live life in a daily battle for sobriety, to live a life avoiding temptation. She didn't want her entire existence to revolve around alcohol. She wanted to take the power away from alcohol rather than make it a reward she was depriving herself of. She wanted freedom from alcohol, she wanted change, to find another way, and she did. Annie Grace authored The Naked Mind, Control Alcohol, Find Freedom, Discover Happiness, and Change Your Life. Her book reprograms your unconscious, allowing you to break free from alcohol. Since publishing her book, she has been featured in publications such as Forbes, New York Daily News, Chicago Tribune, and Mind Body Green. And it's such an honor to have you on the show, and I'm so glad that you're bringing this message out to the world, because it's something that so many people are struggling with.
No, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here. I appreciate it.
Well, we all know I wouldn't say that we all know, but alcohol is such a devastating disease. What caused you to wake up and realize that you had a problem?
It was a lot of little moments, and interestingly, like, my story doesn't have a major rock bottom in terms of like getting into UI or, exploding my marriage or losing my job or anything else like that. But it was a lot of little moments. I remember one time when my son, I was like, "Hey, come sit on my lap," and he was about 4 at the time, and he's like, "No, Mommy, I don't want to. Your lips are purple and you smell funny." And it was just because I was probably on my 3rd glass of wine. And it was little things like that that really caused me to be like, oh, this is not really congruent with who I want to be in the world.
Yeah, fully understand. And how in that place, I mean, how did you view yourself, when you were drinking? I mean, what did you feel about yourself?
Well, it was interesting because about 5 or 6 years before I stopped drinking, I actually had a friend who, she and I would drink together very frequently, and she went to, all of a sudden showed up in my house, and she said she wasn't drinking anymore, that she had gone to AA and she had decided to get sober. And so I was really curious because I was like, oh my gosh, well, if you have a problem, I probably have a problem. And so I was like, well, what is it? Like, do I need to stop too? And she's like, oh no, I learned that I'm an alcoholic, that I was born this way, that I can never drink again in safety. And she's like, you're not, like, our drinking is different. And of course, it's just one person's opinion. It's not an expert opinion or anything like that. But for me at the time, I was like, okay, well, I guess that's not me then. So it kind of closed my mind in a way to actually getting a lot of help, because I was like, well, I'm not drinking, my drinking isn't that bad. And I think that's a really interesting place to be, that a lot of us are, is that our drinking isn't that bad. And so we're asking this question, like, do I have a problem? Am I an alcoholic? And these really scary, big questions, instead of just asking the question, like, would my life be happier if I drank a bit less alcohol, which is a much less scary question. And actually, was the question I ended up really changing to ask some much less scary, simpler questions about drinking before I actually got help, because it was so scary to start thinking that, oh, maybe this is a really big problem, because the repercussions that come with that idea that you're an alcoholic is that everything has to change in your entire life.
And So yeah, the term alcoholic. What does that mean? I mean, when would it relate to an individual?
So it's really interesting because in my research, I've discovered that it's not really medically or even scientifically used anymore. We use something called alcohol use disorder in the DSM-5, and that's more of a spectrum of use and abuse. So you can have mild alcohol use disorder, moderate, or severe, whereas alcoholic is really this black and white concept of you are or you aren't, you're in or you're out. And I think that's what keeps people really afraid, and it is ambiguous. Most people say, well, you have to figure out for yourself if you have a problem, or if you go to your doctor, there would be some sort of how much are you drinking? And the reality is most people who drink regularly are drinking at excessive levels, but they're not necessarily, chemically dependent in terms of they're going to go and have withdrawal symptoms or very severe issues if they stop. And so it does become very ambiguous, and I think that's part of the problem.
And I agree. I mean, it seems like what's out there is this line: if you're drinking this amount and you're alcoholic, if you're drinking this and you're not. And I would assume that it depends a little bit from person to person. But when for an individual, though, evaluating themselves, wondering, is this something that I have an issue with? I come home and I like to kind of relax a little bit and have a glass of something and do I have an issue? I mean, how should an individual kind of view themselves or analyze themselves and then say that maybe this is not good? I mean, where's the line?
Yeah, the line, like you say, it's so individual. I think that really we just, in my opinion, need to start asking a better question, which is, am I happy with this level of drinking? Would I be happier if I drank less? Would I, what would that look like? And actually even experiment with it and say, okay, well, what if I stopped drinking for 30 days? I wonder how I'd feel. I wonder if I'd be fresher in the morning, if I'd have more energy, if I'd lose a few pounds, if I'd wake up with, a better take on life, as opposed to this really scary question, because we keep waiting. I mean, we don't do this with other things. We don't sit around doing something that we're kind of questioning, just waiting for it to become really problematic before we change. But somehow, because of how we view alcohol, we don't look at it as a wellness conversation. And I think if we could shift that, if we could look at drinking as a wellness conversation, is this good enough for me? Am I happy enough? Am I feeling good enough? Is this hindering any part of my life? But not from a, do I have a problem? Am I addicted conversation? Because then it gets really scary. And I think we really need to take the fear out of the questioning.
Yeah, and I think that's an excellent point, because when we look upon food, like sugar or eating too much white flour or whatever it may be, we recognize that I may not be diabetic, but I know that if I don't change something now, I may move in that direction, or also by changing, I will have more energy. I will enjoy life more. My relationships will be better. To recognize that you create a lifestyle so that you can support a life that you enjoy.
Yeah.
So what did you do? I mean, you kind of recognized that you were not in a spot that you wanted to be. All these little things piled up, and you thought that maybe I should do something different or try something different. What did you do, and what was kind of the straw of all these little things that made you think that let's change this?
Yeah, it was really interesting. I think the two key things that I did that were really different was I started asking a different question. So, the question I had been asking was, am I an alcoholic? Do I have a problem? And, the core of that question is, what's wrong with me? And whenever you ask what's wrong with me, your brain is going to fight hard to say there's nothing wrong with you, which is the whole cycle of denial, of course. And so I really started asking, why? Why did this change? Why was it that I didn't drink much at all in college? I barely even drank in my early 20s. I could take it or leave it. And then all of a sudden, here I am in my mid-30s, And the idea of not drinking for an evening, I can do it, but it puts me in a really bad mood. I feel like, oh, tonight's not going to be as much fun, or I'm not going to be able to relax as well. And I get grumpy about it. So it was kind of this idea of asking a different question, moving from the question from what's wrong with me to this other question of why did it change? What happened? And when I started researching that question, the answers that I got about what alcohol does in the brain and the body, the human body, by the way, not the alcoholic body or, just the body of a fraction of people, but everybody's body, it was like, wow, okay, that makes sense. And then the other thing that I did that was really different was I actually stopped trying to stop drinking to find those answers, because I had been on this cycle of just shame and blame and guilt. And it looked a lot like this. Okay, I know that I'm probably drinking more than I want to, so I'm gonna only drink on the weekends. And then, it would be an intense weeknight and I'd have a drink and then I'd beat myself up about it. And I'd be like, okay, I'm just going to have, only 2 glasses of wine. And then by the 3rd glass of wine, it didn't seem to matter. And then I wake up in the morning and beat myself up about it. And so I had been on this cycle of trying to make rules for myself and always finding some loophole or some excuse or some reason to just have one more, whatever the case was. And so I decided I needed to get off that cycle because I wasn't making forward progress. In fact, I was just really robbing myself of my ability to make progress because of how much I was starting to hate myself. I'd been undermining and destroying my very ability to make any change in my life because I no longer thought it was possible because I kept trying and not doing it. So the two things were I asked a better question and I really decided to stop trying to stop drinking until I found the answer.
That's excellent. We're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Healthmade Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Annie Gray. She's the author of This Naked Mind, Control Alcohol, Find Freedom, Discover Happiness, and Change Your Life. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Healthmade Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Annie Gray. She's the author of This Naked Mind, Control Alcohol, Find Freedom, Discover Happiness, and Change Your Life. Annie, I felt you brought up a very important point, and that is the amount of shame and guilt that goes into an individual that knows that they have a problem, but they don't have a solution. They don't know how to fix it. And so your solution was then to stop drinking. And what happened then? I mean, what was your next step? Was that possible?
It was possible to stop trying to stop, yes. And then what happened then was I decided I needed to know. I needed to know what changed. Why was it that I could take it or leave it in my 20s, that it was no big deal, that alcohol wasn't that important. And now suddenly it felt like alcohol was the duct tape that was holding my whole life together. I felt like I wasn't able to de-stress or, be effective in my career in sales and marketing or any of this stuff without it. And so what I did as a first step is I made a list of all of the reasons that I drank. And it was a long, extensive list. And then I took that even one step farther and I started asking other people, why do they drink? And I added their reasons to my list. And I had this huge list. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go through these one by one and find out if they're true. And I had a little bit of a process where I'd ask myself some really telling questions about internal truth for myself, really trying to lean on my own wisdom and guidance. So an example with that would be if I was looking at, I drink because it relaxes me. I'd ask myself some hard questions okay, well, am I more or less relaxed the next day? What about cumulatively in my life right now, drinking as much as I do? Am I more or less relaxed than when I used to not drink as much as I'm doing? And that was pretty telling. But then I actually went and said, okay, well, what does the evidence say? What does the science say about, does alcohol relax human beings? And that was where it got really interesting because alcohol is a depressant. So in response, we release stimulants like adrenaline and cortisol. Cortisol is the stress hormone. So it's doing the opposite of relaxing you, but nobody, obviously they're not going to put that on the Super Bowl commercial. So nobody is really aware. And that was so eye-opening. Every single reason that I had on this lengthy list just got knocked over one by one. Oh, well, it doesn't do that. Well, it doesn't do that. Well, it doesn't do that. And so it was almost a year's worth of research for me. And at the end of the year, I remember telling my husband, I was like, well, if you want to drink with me again, tonight's the night, because after this, I'm done. I'm not going to get drunk anymore. I don't even think I'm ever going to drink anymore. And he's like, what? Who are you? That's crazy. And sure enough, we split a bottle of wine, and that was really it, because I was just so sure there was nothing there for me anymore once I really exposed alcohol for the truth of what's in the bottle.
So I'm curious. So one of the reasons to drink, like you said, I just want to relax. But then you say that in reality, at the end of the day, it actually causes more stress, and you have less ability to feel joy after. What are some of the other things that were kind of a big among all the people that you're asking and in your own life for reasons that people drink?
Social life is a really big one. Social anxiety was huge. Feeling, the peer pressure of it, going out and feeling like, oh, everybody else is doing it, so I have to do it as well. And that one was a little bit tougher because it wasn't like there was just some study saying it doesn't help with social anxiety. But one of the things I did discover is that as soon as you are the one person that's going out and saying, no, you know what, I'm going to have an iced tea, it's amazing how many people in the social situation then say, oh, thank goodness, I want that too. And you can do this as just a little experiment for yourself. If you go out with a group of people and you're the first one to order, the first person to order, if they order a drink, almost everybody at the table orders a drink. If the first person to order doesn't, almost everybody at the table doesn't in a lot of cases. And it's just so interesting how we're making this decision about something we're putting in our bodies that is really not healthy for us. I mean, some of the statistics, and I never want to be scary, but some of the statistics are so intense. Like 2 drinks a week for women can increase a woman's chance of breast cancer by up to 15%, according to some recent studies. And we're just doing it because we're not questioning it in a lot of cases. Most people aren't drinking because they're clinically addicted or they're dependent. In fact, according to the CDC, 90% of excessive drinkers, so people who are drinking excessively, which is more than 8 drinks per week for women or 15 for men, 90% of them are not chemically dependent. 90% of them, aren't going to have a problem if they stop physically, but we're just drinking because it's the thing to do. And it's mind-boggling when you really look at it to say, wow, we're all doing this to keep up with each other, but we're not examining it, right? And I think one of the problems is because we aren't looking at it mindfully. We aren't examining it because it has such a stigma. Because even asking the question, you and I could sit down and have a plate of donuts, and we'd be like, oh, let's just have a bite because I don't want all the fat and calories and sugar and all that stuff. But we'd never sit down with a bottle of wine and be like, oh, let's just split a glass because I don't want the cancer. It just wouldn't happen. Be like, oh, you're not drinking? Are you okay? What's wrong? It gets so intense so quickly with alcohol.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So you have, and when you saw that you had an issue and you went through all of these reasons, why you drank, and then debunked pretty much every reason, you then went to a journey and ended up with writing a book called This Naked Mind. I'm curious, why did you name it The Naked Mind, This Naked Mind?
Yeah, it was really a funny story, actually. And it was interesting, too, because the book didn't start as a book. It really started as just my collection of research. And I was still working in a corporate job and, not really intending to do this. I like to say I was an accidental author. But I knew this information was so important that I put it out just kind of on the internet in a PDF, just on a page. You could just download it for free. There it was, just live there so people could access it. And 20,000 people downloaded it in 2 weeks. And I started getting letters from all over the world, like people just saying, oh my gosh, this helped me. This is so good. Thank you so much. And somebody wrote, and like, you should make this a book. And I was like, okay, I'm going to figure out how to do that. And so I ended up self-publishing. And so when I was thinking about a title, I was in my kitchen and I was really thinking about it, like, what is this for me? Because for me, it's about just like when I was young, I didn't need a drink to relax or to have a good time. I didn't need a drink to feel comfortable. I was like, I just want to go back to that, like back to that really innocent, place. And I was eating bare naked granola, which is basically organic granola without any additives or sugars or stuff like that. I was like, oh, that's kind of like it is. I just don't want the additives. I don't want the chemicals. I just want it to be, really just my mind to be naked. And so that was really where the title came from.
That's perfect. I love it. Where it's all clean. I love it.
Yes,
so
exactly.
And because when you recognize that you had an issue, obviously there are a lot of programs out there, like obviously AA is the one we know the most. Why did you feel that you needed to create something different?
It was so interesting because I didn't feel that I needed to create something different. I just didn't feel like AA was a fit for me for a few reasons. Number one, my friend had told me that I wasn't an alcoholic, and so it didn't apply to me. So that was in the back of my mind. Number two, because I had two little kids, and I knew her experience was that you needed to go to 90 meetings in 90 days. And I was like, that's just not even possible in my life. And also, I guess the third reason, my brother had spent some time in AA as part of something that he did when he was younger. And he said that, everybody really says, hi, I'm an alcoholic. And I didn't feel like an alcoholic. And I didn't want to say that I was, but it wasn't really conscious that I was like, okay, nothing's going to work for me, so I'm going to create something new. It was more like, I just want to know why this is happening. And so it was through that everything was created, but it was a much, much less intentional, like, okay, I need to find something new. It was just really that I wanted to solve this for myself. And I didn't feel like I was, if you have this stereotype in your head of what an alcoholic is. I mean, my friend, she was like, well, for me, it means that I've never, ever left a bottle of wine undrunk. Like, I would never leave an open bottle of wine in my kitchen. I was like, well, I would do that, like, if I was done drinking. Or, she's like, I always, if we were out drinking, then I would go after everybody was done, and I would go to another bar by myself and close that bar down before I went home. And I was like, oh, okay, I've never done that. And so there was these very, again, random, loose factoids about what it might or might not mean to be an alcoholic. And in my mind, for whatever reason, I just wasn't. And so I just wanted to change my drinking. In fact, I didn't even want to necessarily stop drinking. That wasn't my intention. But once I learned everything, I had as much desire to drink alcohol as I would to, like, pick up a glass of motor oil. Like, it just didn't appeal to me anymore. And I think that's one of the interesting things about the book in general is when people read it, they're like, wow. I actually have some reviews online that say, don't read this book if you don't want to stop drinking because it just takes away your desire. And, thanks a lot, 5 stars. It's kind of, they get cheeky about it because I think when you see the truth that the things that you think are a benefit aren't a benefit, you're like, why would I want to do that? And so it wasn't really intentional for me to create like a alternative or a program or anything like that. It was so much more just about me asking a lot of questions.
Yeah, which is the best way of doing things. We're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Healthmade Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Annie Grace. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Healthmade Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Annie Grace. She is the author of This Naked Mind, Control Alcohol, Find Freedom, Discover Happiness, and Change Your Life. So, Annie, what are the components of the program? What does it consist of?
So it really is just all about, the first step. You could put it into four different areas now, although that's not exactly how the book is written. It's come since as I've tried to create something that, people can be trained in and help other people. But the first step is it's a path, so PATH, and the first step is a pause, where you just kind of put down those weapons of shame and blame, and you do what I did and say, okay, I'm gonna start to heal a little bit. I'm gonna start to build on things that are success, and I'm gonna start to win. And this is really education around, this is not necessarily your fault. Absolutely, it's your responsibility. But let's talk about the chemicals that are going on in the brain. I mean, addiction hijacks the brain to the point where the brain literally thinks the substance you're addicted to is key for your survival. And so we spend so much time blaming ourselves that we're weak or we're broken or we're stupid, or if only we just loved our spouse or our kids or our partner more we'd be able to get out of it. And none of that is actually the truth. The truth is your brain has been hijacked. And until you can see and understand that loop, there's so much blame and shame, which, as drinkers, if you feel stress, if you feel upset, if you feel painful emotions, what do you want to do? You want to pour another drink. So that's the P. It's called the pause. And it's really just getting out of that blame, shame cycle and understanding what's really going on in the brain. And then the second step is A for act. And that's just a technique that I've come up with to change beliefs. So you look at your beliefs and you say, is that true? Is it true internally? Is it really relaxing me the next day? Or is it true externally? And that's really like, what does the science say? Does alcohol relax human beings? If not, why does it feel good to have a drink for the first, half an hour? And so we look into all of the science, and that's the A, and it's a total mindset shift. And then T is for transform, and this is where people pick a goal that they know they can win at. And this is just all about like, okay, I want to pick something that I can win. If that's a day, that's a day. If it's an hour, it's an hour. If it's a month, it's a month. And really starting to build on success. And then H is for hone in the last letter of the path. And that's really about like looking at everything like a data point and honoring the science that says that, the shortest path to change is actually through mistakes and through obstacles and through realizing that they aren't the end of the world, but they're also just the tools that you need to say, okay, I drank in that situation. What was happening? Where was the stress coming from? What were my beliefs? Let's look at it and let's really change it. And so that's the four pieces we take people through in the programs.
And what is what is the success that you've seen? I know you've had people that have written comments saying that don't read the book, you'll never want to drink again. Do you feel that is which is like the best compliment ever? Do you feel that is consistent, or do you feel people need more support?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think for me, I've really asked myself this question over the first few years I was doing this. I was like, why? What's the difference between somebody who can read the book and just be done forever on a dime? Then I'm getting a letter, 4 years for me, I'm so happy, 5 years, I'm so happy, and all this stuff. And I'm like, and then there's people who, I've read the book 4 times, I read the book 5 times, it's just not working for me, what's the deal? And so I really was looking at this, and I realized that we drink for 3 key reasons, right? For 3 key levels of belief. We have beliefs around the substance. This drink is going to relax me. And if you're just drinking because you have beliefs around the substance, and I deconstruct all of those beliefs, it's going to be really easy to stop. And I believe those are the people who are just done with the book. You read about and you're like, I'm done. That's like my husband, just done. And then we have the second layer of belief that's a little more insidious, and it's societal beliefs. So if you're drinking because you believe you're not going to fit in your family or even in your marriage, which is true for a lot of people, they think, alcohol is kind of the glue keeping their marriage together. It's going to be much harder to stop. And then that third level of beliefs is beliefs around self. And that sounds like, oh, I'm not a strong enough mom without my, bottle of wine at night because I just can't get through it. And if you're drinking, for beliefs around self, where you just are really self-medicating because of some inadequacies in your own perception of yourself or your relationship with yourself, that's much deeper and certainly need more help than just a book can provide, although the book can be a great first step.
Yeah, and that's, I see that a lot, is that you may be in a relationship that puts a lot of stress and you don't feel like you can be yourself. So then the best way is to try to shut yourself down, and alcohol works great for that, to shut yourself down, and all of a sudden a relationship becomes tolerable because you have disconnected. So, obviously the real solution would be then to fix a relationship, but that's hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things is alcohol is like a Band-Aid. You've got this wound and you put this Band-Aid over it so you can't see it. But what you don't realize is that whether it's the relationship with yourself or with your partner or with your kids or whatever the reason is, all you've done by putting a Band-Aid over there is you've created this warm, damp place for the wound to fester. And so you're not healing it. And so it takes a lot of courage to say, all right, the things that I'm drinking for, I'm gonna bring them into the light. I'm gonna heal them. I'm gonna go through that discomfort. And it's this crazy catch-22, because when you're numbing the emotions that show you what needs to be healed, it's very difficult to do the healing because the emotions aren't bad enough because you're numbing them. So it creates this cycle, whereas if you take the alcohol out of the equation, then you're face to face with the things that need to be healed. You heal them so much faster when alcohol isn't an option, because you actually have to do the work to just, be in your own brain.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Healthmade Radio. I'm here with Annie Grace. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Healthmade Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Annie Grace. She is the author of This Naked Mind, Control Alcohol, Find Freedom, Discover Happiness, and Change Your Life. Do you think that after someone have had a problem with alcohol and they stop drinking, do they need to always stop drinking, or is there a way that they can find a healthy balance after?
Yeah, I always like to just go back to what the science says about especially controversial questions like this. And the science is really clear that a lot of people stop drinking at problematic levels but continue drinking. So, there's not this idea. It's so interesting to me. With alcohol, we have this idea that 100% is success and 99.9% is failure, aka relapse. And when we look at it like that, the amount of pressure and shame that comes with that relapse is very, very intense. And there are certainly people who have drank enough alcohol for a long enough period of time where their brain has actually changed in relation to the drug. They've, killed off dopamine receptors. One drink will put them right back where they were. And people need to find that out for themselves. And there's some people who certainly should never touch it again because their brain has been changed to that extent. But the majority of people can go back to drinking at non-problematic levels. Now, the science does say that that's often after a 1 to 2 year long break. If you've been drinking at problematic levels, if you want to drink again, it's really good to have that long of a reset. And any less than that, it's a pretty slippery slope. But also there's lots of people who, I would love it if people started to become mindful in their drinking well before they have a problem, because then the chances of you continuing to drink at levels that are not problematic are so much more significant, right? And so if you don't want to cut out alcohol out of your life altogether, if you still want to have the occasional bachelorette party or wedding or happy hour or whatever, then the sooner you look at it mindfully, and the sooner you look at it as like a wellness conversation. I stopped eating sugar pretty much full stop a few years ago, and now I can have a little bit of sugar without like creating this insane sugar addiction that I used to have, where I was like compelled to eat every bit of sugar I could get my hands on. But that was so much because I really became mindful about it. And I said, you know what, I would rather become mindful about this than actually quit altogether, because it's an easier thing to do to kind of live in the society we're in. But I do think it's very individual. There are absolutely people who really drinking again is going to put them in a very bad place.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you brought up an interesting point in regards to killing off your dopamine receptors. Dopamine obviously is something that we all need, and without dopamine, what can you tell the listeners a little bit about dopamine and why is it important, and what happens when you're drinking to them?
Yeah, it's so fascinating, and it's one of the ways that the brain really is hijacked to learn addiction. So dopamine is the learning molecule, and if we were cavemen and we were out in the woods and we were looking for food and we found a raspberry bush, we'd have a dopamine response. And our brain would say, ding, 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 that was good. Do that thing again, that thing you just did. And the same thing would happen for sex. The same thing happens if we, shoot an antelope with our bow and arrow, for example. And so all of these things release dopamine. But in our current society, we have created things that release dopamine at artificially high levels. So when you are talking about, shooting a bow and arrow into a target versus a first-person shooter video game. The first-person shooter video game is going to continuously release dopamine at a higher level. If you're talking about finding raspberries and the dopamine release compared to high fructose corn syrup, we're going to have a much higher dopamine release with the corn syrup. And anything that's addictive, from alcohol to heroin to, even Netflix or Instagram, has a dopamine response. And what that is telling your brain to do is that thing you just did, do that thing again. But I think the more intense part of that is it's telling your brain, do that thing again to survive. We need that for survival. And so when you have this artificially high dopamine response, which you can look across the board and say, what are the things that artificially stimulate dopamine in the brain? And they are for profit, very, very profitable, commercial endeavors in most cases. And so it's just fascinating to look at that. And the more that you do that, the less receptive your brain is to the things that would naturally stimulate dopamine. So if the more you would look at pornography, the less receptive your brain is to natural sexual stimulation. The more you would play first-person video game shooting, the less you would have a dopamine response just to shooting a basketball and getting it in the hoop. And so you actually can lessen your natural ability to find pleasure in natural activities when you are continuously flooding your brain with the activities that artificially stimulate dopamine.
And you always will seek, obviously, you reach a certain level, and that depletes the amount of dopamine that you are then receiving with that type of excitement. So then you have to go for the next level of excitement and so forth until all of a sudden you're not able to feel any joy, feel any excitement, and you feel purposeless.
Yeah, and that's exactly what tolerance is. I mean, I remember near the end of my drinking days being able to drink close to 2 bottles of wine and saying, I don't even feel it. I don't even feel it. Why am I doing this? But at that point, you want to do it, you're compelled to, even though you don't like it. And that's where it gets, that's the crux of addiction, is not even liking what you're doing anymore, but desperately feeling like you need to do it, because if you don't, you just don't feel okay in your own skin. You don't feel like you're going to survive.
And also you've trained, the dopamine reward system have trained yourself to follow a certain pattern. And like you're saying, that this pattern is then based upon our kind of reptilian survival mechanism, because that's where these kind of neurotransmitters, how they were created, was to help us to survive. And but then we are, as we're continuing the pattern, we are losing our ability to get the reward, but we're still stuck in the pattern.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
How do, and a lot of these things, and obviously they take place subconsciously or unconscious, and how can an individual then kind of go through and clear out some of these unconscious or subconscious drivers that may put a person in a place where they feel they have to have alcohol or some other kind of addictive behavior?
A lot of it is just, stopping the substance for a period of time and then working on the belief. So there's always an emotional aspect and there's a physical aspect. And the dopamine is really physical, and your brain will heal chemically. Like if you take even as little as 2 weeks off, although I'd suggest at least 30 days, just to let your brain kind of rebalance and heal itself, and you'll have a completely different look on life. But you can't do that while you're just feeling for the whole 30 days like, oh, poor me, I'm just, can't have a drink. You really have to look at, okay, well, why was I doing it anyway? And is it doing what I thought it was going to do, so that you relieve the emotional part of it. I could not drink for a week or 2 weeks or whatever. I could take breaks, but I was always, so emotionally attached to it. I felt really like I was being deprived because I had such strong beliefs that it was helping me relax or helping me enjoy myself or have fun or socialize or all of these things. And so when you come at it with both of those things, not only the physical break to let your really brain and neurochemical interactions settle down, but also the emotional and the mindset piece, it's really magical.
That's incredible. what kind of support does an individual need while they go through this? I mean, like we're talking a little bit about that some people can just read the book. I mean, what would you suggest for the listeners out there, how they need to kind of set up their support system or reach out to the people around themselves and ask them for help?
Yeah, I think it's so important to get in touch with other people going through the same thing. So I actually created a free alcohol challenge. It's at alcoholexperiment.com, and 110,000 people have gone through it, and it's always free. And the idea is that you feel so alone in this. You feel like, oh, I'm the only one questioning this. I'm the only one wondering if I'm drinking too much. And then all of a sudden you're in this group with thousands of other people and you're like, wait a second, I'm not alone. And then you see other people doing it, and it has the effect of, like, when somebody breaks the 4-minute mile, then everybody starts to break it. When you see that someone is changing, you feel so much more empowered to change yourself. So I think having community, and I don't think we need necessarily specialists or counselors as much as like just really good community to help us with that. And then obviously having a specialist, having a counselor is always a benefit and helpful, but I think the community is sometimes even more important.
And also in your book, you were talking about kind of the journey relapse. What does that mean?
It's just this idea of continuously forgiving yourself, of realizing that we're just all on a path. There's never an end. And, we really need to just always be holding ourselves with so much compassion and forgiveness. There's been so many times where, I've thought, okay, I've made it now. I've done this thing. And then all of a sudden you find yourself back a few steps. And the more the science shows the faster we can forgive ourselves, the more we can have compassion for ourselves, the faster we actually change and the more fulfilled we are in that change.
So it's always then recognizing that I'm on this journey, and sometimes I'm going to slip a little bit, or I'm going to falter, and I just need to forgive myself and keep up going on the journey.
Absolutely.
And what is your? I'm curious. What is your relationship to alcohol right now?
I don't drink. I haven't really drank in 5 years now. So, but it's very much by choice and from a happy, peaceful place, not from a I can never drink again place. In fact, I don't ever say that I'm never going to drink again, because I know my mind, and I know as soon as I put a rule like that on myself, my mind's going to be like, wait, what? Oh my gosh.
I can't have it.
So,
I need more.
Yes, exactly. Forbidden fruit syndrome. I don't want to have that. I just want to make a choice, and a happy, peaceful choice.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge component, like you mentioned earlier. It's that fear, letting go of that fear of the drinking, mm-hmm. and we're always attracted to strong emotions. So if we have a fear of something, somehow that will then start to pull us in. And if we can then let go, we can go through this process without the fear of something, and we can do it out of choice and understanding, and also then letting go of the emotions that are associated with it. Then we would have a much better outcome.
Absolutely.
Well, Annie, it's been such a pleasure having you on the show. What you're doing is amazing, and I know it is saving thousands of people's lives out there, in addition to all the relationships and everything else that goes along with it. So thank you so much for what you're doing, and I really urge all the listeners to read your book, This Naked Mind. And what's great with it is that, yes, it breaks down the addiction to alcohol, but it relates to pretty much any kind of addiction.
Yes, absolutely. It can apply to anything, because the components are very, very similar, if not identical.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. That is it for today. Remember, check us out at healthmade.co. Health is what you make it.